Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I've got a first impressions to do for you on the Vero Impulse. This is another knife that was loaned to me by Jason from the Millie PM2 Para 3 Club. I just shot my first impressions on this one. So a lot of what I say about this knife is going to be very similar to what I say about the Synapse, but there are some key differences between these knives, and it was important to me to review them separately, even though there will be quite a bit of overlap, because I do want these knives to stand on their own. I don't want to talk about them as if they're the same knife. They are very different in a couple of key ways. So I'm going to link down below to Jason's links via the Millie PM2 Para 3 Club. So it'll be their YouTube. I'll specifically also link to their YouTube video of the interview with Jason Vero. With Joseph Vero that Jason interviewed him for. Anyways, that'll be linked down below, as well as their Instagram, their Facebook, and you can check all that out. So before I opened these knives, I thought I was going to prefer the Synapse to the Impulse, because I thought the Impulse was going to be too big for my preferences. I was wrong. This knife does not feel too big to me. I like the size of this knife. It is big. It's pushing the boundaries of the size of knife that I typically find in my front right pocket as a primary, but it's not too big. And part of what makes it so fun is its size. And so let's talk a little bit about the ingredients here, and then we'll talk about, kind of like I did with the Synapse and with most of my first impressions videos, we'll talk about what I'm really liking so far, what I might not be so sold on, and just like with the Synapse, I think I'm going to end up with a couple of questions for Joseph that I'm hoping I get the opportunity to talk to him about and ask him a little bit, and just find out if there's a reason for certain design elements that I'm not so sure about, or just, pick his brain a little bit. So, materials-wise, a little bit different from the Synapse. It has still an M390 blade, which has the fantastic belt satin grinds. Really can't say enough good about how well done this belt satin is. I am impressed that Best Tech is able to do that. Best Tech is the one building this knife for Joseph. So the blade finish looks great. It gets nice and thin behind the edge. This one actually feels a little bit thinner behind the edge to me than the Synapse, which is interesting. Maybe part of that is because it's a taller blade, so you can get a little bit of a taller grind coming down. But it looks great, functions great. I've done just a tiny bit of test cutting with this to see how the edge performs. Not going to be rough on this knife or do any extensive testing, but I've been impressed with the little bit of cutting that I've done. We have a titanium frame lock. The Synapse is a bolster lock. So this one, being pure titanium, has immediately a very different sensation than the bolster lock, which has some scales overlaid onto it. I really like titanium frame locks. I enjoy them. It happens to be one of my favorite ways to build a knife. Not that I build, but one of my favorite ways that knives are built. It feels really good in the hand to have something that's a full metal construction. And titanium, I don't know, when it's done right, it just has this nicer sensation to it, I think. Feeling kind of the weightiness of it, and I don't know, it feels good to me to have a titanium frame lock. I'm sure that probably comes as no surprise. I bet most of you watching this are familiar with what a titanium frame lock feels like. But I thought I would prefer the bolster lock, and I don't. Oftentimes I think the advantage of a bolster lock is it can kind of help the ergos to have a scale material set over, and it improves the grip a little bit. But at least with this carbon fiber, it's every bit as slick as the titanium is. It doesn't give me any more grip. And then it also, on this one, it gets like just a little bit of a corner here. Not enough to be super bothersome, but here with this frame lock, there's no corner there that I'm running into where the scale terminates, because there's no scale. So I like that. And then this corner here is softened really, really well. So that's not a hot spot. It's not bothersome to me. The one disadvantage to it being a frame lock compared to the bolster lock is where the scale sits over the frame here on the bolster lock, it covers this. And this, where it relates to the pocket clip, it's kind of right where the pocket clip ends. I do find it snags on my pocket a little bit when I'm putting this knife in and out of pocket, and so that can be a little bit of a bummer that it's got kind of a catch point. If that was internally milled, I think it would alleviate that problem. Or if the pocket clip was maybe a little bit longer, that might help it as well. I don't know. It's just that tends to be a little bit of a catch point for my pocket. So, titanium frame lock, titanium backspacer, titanium clip, titanium hardware, stainless steel hardened interface internally, which I think is great. It's also got an over travel stop, but that's the materials we're playing with, right? And it's all done really, really well. The titanium has this like little bit of a stone washing on it, and you can also, if you get really close to it, I don't know if it's gonna show on video, I'll be impressed if it does, but you can kind of see the machine marks a little bit, which is interesting to me because it is stone washed. I almost wish that he had either, or they in manufacturing had either made those marks more pronounced or sufficiently hidden them a little more, because it's like stone washed, but then I can see a little bit of the machining. And so, I don't know, I like it when the machining is shown, when it seems deliberate, not when it seems like I'm not supposed to see it. But that's a very small thing, and you have to get close to it to even notice it. Yeah, so let's talk action. Spoiler alert, I like this action way better than the Synapse. The Synapse is good, but the weight of this blade, the size of the knife in general, it feels so much more fun to play with, a lot more fluid, a lot more drop shutty. I was playing with this knife quite a bit yesterday, enough so that it started to migrate off center, and so I did tighten this back down, got it right back to centered, and the action feels great. If this was my knife, I'd probably Loctite it right in this position to keep that from happening again, but it's not my knife, so I'm not going to throw Loctite in somebody else's knife. But yeah, this blade, the way that it flows with that flipper tab, or by middle finger flicking it, it's just a very satisfying action. It runs great on these bearings. It's very fluid. It feels like a titanium frame lock flipper on bearings should to me. And kudos to Best Tech for getting this action so good. I mean, it's very, very good. Yeah, I mentioned on the Synapse video, and I'll reiterate in a shorter way here, because I imagine a lot of people will have already watched that. If they're watching this, you might not have. If you want to check that one out, it exists as well. But in my first impressions of that knife, I talked quite a bit about the choice to have this be a slot instead of a hole, and I can't say enough that I appreciate for this design that he did that, because if it was a hole all the way through, I tried I wouldn't be able to, like, if this was in my right hand, and imagine it's a hole that goes all the way through, to thumb flick it out, it's just not, like, it's not a good design for thumb flicking with this slot if it was a hole, but as a middle finger flicking device, it works fantastically well. I really like being able to middle finger flick this knife, and it's executed very, very well. And then that also leads to just one of the most sterile, good-looking show sides possible. That this is just an uninterrupted blade surface. Looks really good to me. I also like that he put the etching on the spine where it says Vero instead of billboarded on the side anywhere. It's just a really good stylistic touch to me. So the action is great. Just like on the Synapse, to use the flipper tab, I have to kind of recondition myself to not land on the frame, because it has that weird opening that I need to ask about, where it's milled out in this pocket right where your finger lands. If you do come down onto the frame, it like stops into this pocket, and that's just kind of a bummer. I wish it wasn't widened out there. It seems unnecessary to me, but maybe I'll learn it is necessary, so I'm open to that being the case. If you do it just right though, and instead of like priming it and landing there, you just pull kind of downwards and away from the knife, it's very, very pleasant. Feels good. So the action is even better than the Synapse. The same main issue that I have with the Synapse I have here, because this pocket clip is the same thing, just scaled to fit this knife. I love the way this pocket clip looks, especially on this one where it's this nice blue anodized color that matches the hardware perfectly. It looks so good on this knife. I adore the way it looks. But in hand, goodness, I don't like this pocket clip. It's just a hot spot for me. It really is. If I'm on the knife right where my fingers want to land, which is a pretty comfortable spot in terms of like the way this profile is machined, it puts the tip of that clip right into the center of my hand in a very annoying spot. If I choke forward, it puts it further back, but now it's just hitting back here. If I choke back on the knife, now it's just hitting right here. It's like I can't get around that pocket clip being an annoying spot. Even in a reverse grip, the way it interacts with my fingertips is like, it sticks up a little bit prouder than I think it should. And it's just, the angles are a little bit sharp. It's not like gonna cut me sharp, but if it was rounded more, it wouldn't look as good. I get that, but it would feel so much better in my hand. And so that, it rubs me a little bit the wrong way, literally. So that's really my only main critique of this knife. I guess the only other thing I could say that I could see being a critique of it is a little heavy. I think that's mostly just because this is a nice, pretty thick stock of M390, and it's a lot of it, and it's a big knife in general. This knife feels heavy compared to a lot of other knives, but for a titanium frame lock of this size, it doesn't feel too heavy to me at all. In fact, the weight kind of feels appropriate on this knife, and it is internally milled. Not the most extensive internal milling that I've ever seen, but it's substantial. They've definitely milled out some pretty big pockets in there. I don't think you're going to be able to see, but I'll try just in case. I don't know. But yeah, so being all titanium and M390 construction, like that's literally all the ingredients we're playing with here, I feel like it's the weight is very much fair. So I like it quite a bit. If I were to pick one of these to own between these two models, honestly, I would pick this one. And I thought I was going to land the opposite way when I started checking these out. Sorry about that. You ever have a day where things are just not going smoothly? That's my day today. Anyways, apologize for the quick interruption. Where was I? I think I'm kind of wrapping up my feelings on my first impressions of this knife anyways. But the way I feel about it now, I do prefer it to the Synapse. I think this design has surprised me for being... I sincerely thought I was going to prefer the littler one, and this one just feels more fun to me. I like the blade shape a little bit more, which is weird because I'm not usually as much of a Tanto guy. I think the design of this one makes even more sense to me, and I like the design of the Synapse. But my same kind of snags still exist on this one. Like the pocket clip is kind of a bummer. I'm not totally sure why this space is milled out right here where I land if I don't do the flipper tab just right. But the same strengths also apply. Like I love the slot for middle finger flicking. I love the design aesthetically. It carries the same but bigger. It's a big heavy knife in pocket, and it's not deep carry, but it's a decent profile. I like that the angles are milled here so that it feels kind of contoured in hand and in pocket. It flows pretty well for being as big as it is. Knives this large are kind of a finicky thing for me. I feel like oftentimes the ergos don't work for me so well, and on this one the profile of the handle feels even better than the Synapse to my hand. In fact, the way that it flows in my hand, the clip feels less hot spotty than it does on the Synapse by a little bit, just because it puts it in like a softer part of my palm maybe. I don't know. It feels good. I'll give this one the edge at the moment. That Gardner is going to drive me nuts. I'm sorry. This video is it's not going well today. Anyways, I'm going to let that be that now that we're dealing with that and my daughter's calling for me and it's a whole thing. But This has been the Vero Impulse. These are my first impressions, and I will be back in about a week with a full review on this one. So I guess be looking forward to that. Hopefully that video goes way better than this one does. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. Thanks again to Jason for sending me this to check out, and I will check in with you guys very soon.